Okay, we just had a really big earthquake, so I stopped the video for a second. So just in case the first part doesn't actually go into the recording, I'm going to share screen and show you how we can, as a team, consistently approach the data, examine across what incidents in this context are, which is the questions, question 1, question 2, question 3, so that we're specifically comparing answers just to that one question across a variety of interviews. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. And what I did was I pulled up the Valor Student Focus Group. What I highly recommend that you do is to pull up the focus group that you're going to be analyzing and listen to it from start to finish. Sorry, there's a lot of chaos because people are reacting to the earthquake. Anyway, so what I would do on a piece of paper, I'm going to show you how I would keep notes for this. So I'm just opening a new Word doc. And what I would probably do, as I'm listening to the data, is I would probably do question 1. So as I hear the interview, let me also make this small. So as I'm listening to the interview and the person says, you know, first question's going to be whatever. I'm kind of making a note on my paper that's like, okay, now they're talking about question 1. And then I'm listening to what the people say. I'm not really taking copious notes, but I am thinking, that kind of sounds like this. So I might maybe jot that down. So that sounds a little bit like, they feel like stigma is about like cultural beliefs, about stigma itself. So it's like somehow stigma influences them having their own stigma. Interesting. So I'm just kind of thinking these thoughts. So that's one theme. The next thing I hear is like, it kind of sounds like there's like a lack of knowledge around stigma or around mental health issues. And maybe that seems like something else that people are saying. And then maybe a third thing that people are saying is that there's just like a lack of resources. Okay. So I've jotted down a few of these kind of like, I have just kind of these inklings that stuff is happening here. And I want to try to keep this between 3 and let's say 8. So at the end of listening to the whole interview, you'll have this for every question, et cetera, right? You'll have a few of these things that popped into your mind as you're listening. And in some cases, some of them are the same, but in some cases, maybe they're a little different. And then some of them are way off. But however it all comes out, you've listened to it and you've kind of picked out a few kind of key points that seem like they're meaningful to you. The next thing that we do is we open up the transcript itself, which this is the transcript, the Valor transcript. And so in this instance, we only want to focus on question 1, right? So we take question 1 here. And let's say that we think that these are the 3 main themes that we thought about while we were listening to it. So we're going to color code them. So let's make this first one that the stigma itself kind of begets stigma. This idea that there is stigma against mental health makes people kind of feel like they themselves react to it, even within themselves. So I'm going to change this to, well, let's leave it like it is. Okay, so I'm going to color code that red. Lack of knowledge about mental health, I'm going to color code that blue. And then lack of resources, I'm going to color code that green, right? So now I have these however many themes I've come up with. I've color coded them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the transcript itself and I'm going to pull out information about question 1. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to go down This is all still question 1. And you know what? Let's just do the first bit because I don't have time to necessarily read it and figure out when Eric or whoever says, this is the second one. Okay, here we go. So let's say that's all the text related to question 1. I'm gonna copy it, I'm gonna bring it into here, and I'm gonna paste it. Now we're just looking at this document. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to highlight in yellow what the interviewer said, right? So I'm going to take, and this is just for my own ability to kind of differentiate what I care about and what I'm not really interested in, because anything that the interviewer fed in is not real data. It's kind of us leading them. Okay, so then this is the end of my, and that's the end of it. So everything that's left, and then obviously below here is what you would do as you proceeded with question 2, question 3, whatever. But what's left that isn't highlighted is the actual data that we can use across these interviews and compare across these interviews. And so we're gonna now try to organize that a little bit. So if something that we read relates to the sense that we thought that like stigma is about cultural beliefs, then we're going to change it red. And if some of it is lack of knowledge about mental health, then we're going to change it blue. You can either change the color of the text or you can highlight. It's totally up to you. But the idea is we basically want to be able to immediately visually recognize what seems to be happening most frequently, and then reading through it, what seems most significant, because that's part of the coding. So this first sentence, you're basically asking me like why people see it as a bad thing, like mental health. So this person, even though she was clarifying, is saying people see it as a bad thing, right? So we could, if we wanted to, code this red, but I don't know that we necessarily want to, but we could. Well, I would say society, because society, they say that having mental health issues is like, oh, something's wrong with you. So they give you help and all that, right? So this is, this whole section, let's just go to here, is probably about this red code. So let's do it right. Okay. So when people are like depressed or like they start feeling things they don't know, they start to get like, oh my God, something is wrong with me. So this, I need help. Okay, so this little portion right here is really this lack of knowledge about mental health, right? So people are depressed and they start feeling things that they like don't know or don't understand, then their reaction is something is wrong with me, right? So that is more about them understanding what having mental illness means, right? So that's a lack of knowledge thing. I need help, but then I would be admitting that something is wrong with me. So you're gonna go in here and there are places where people misspoke. You can fill in words that do not change the intent of the sentence, but make it flow a little bit more grammatically. Sometimes we do that when we're working with children or minority populations, people who don't kind of speak formal English, because we don't want to represent them as uneducated when we do a publication, because it's just kind of an offensive thing to do. So if there's a way to make it smooth by like adding a verb tense or something like that, then you just do it, but you always bracket in. But then I would be admitting that something is wrong with me. So I feel like society is saying that something is wrong is making it look like a bad thing. So this whole section is red, but a little bit of blue too, right? It seemed like this whole section from here to here is kind of a combination of two of these things. So we need to maybe consider, keep in the back of our mind as we move through coding, because we've only done very little, that potentially those two categories need to be meshed into one. A category that potentially says something like society's lack of knowledge about mental health contributes to stigma. Something like that. So we don't know yet. All we're doing right now is coding. Also, it could be people, because if they tell you something negative about yourself, you're just rethinking it in your head and it doesn't get off your head until a certain amount of time. That's interesting. Is that any of these things? I think this is more of a stigma feeds stigma I'm going to create a new code for that because I think that seems interesting and important, and I want to talk about it. So I just color coded that purple. So I'm going to color code that purple. Again, that may be more about friends. It may be more about social influences. It may be about something else. We haven't really refined the category yet, but I'm just trying to break down sentence by sentence, line by line, what was actually being said here. For me, I feel like it's more because they don't really know what a mental illness is. So if they don't really, it's like they don't really know what the person is feeling because they don't have it. So this is about knowledge again. So I highlight it and knowledge is blue. So I'm going to turn that blue. Okay. And they don't know the feelings that a person with mental illness has. So this is, I think, a little bit of the blue, but I also think it might be something like feeling like lack of personal connection to mental illness. I think might be a different code because I think that's, to me, that feels a little bit more like what was being said. So I'm color coding that orange. Obviously you could do, let's see. And I think I'm going to do this whole last section is orange. Yeah, so you're going to, even within the same line sometimes, have multiple codes. And we would just kind of continue and go through the rest of this. And what you'll notice is that some colors, and like I said, you could highlight it or you can color code, it's up to you. Some colors will jump out as being more frequent. And if you look through here, nothing really jumps out as being more frequent, right? It seems like the blue and red are about equal, the orange and purple, interesting, they maybe kind of overlap. Once we go through all of the data, we'll recognize that some of these things do appear more frequently and some less. And some of these things, like I mentioned, are actually combinations of these categories that could actually create this very robust, larger category that incorporates not only a lack of knowledge, but a lack of personal connection to mental illness, maybe, or not only a lack of resources, but a lack of knowledge about how to use them, right? So we may ultimately combine these codes. But the idea first is to really get into the data and think about it and think about how you're thinking about it and just kind of organize it. So at the end of all of this, what will happen is every question will have a little section like this, and you will have coded it. We'll come together as a group and we will discuss these things, right? So our next step before we do theoretical sampling is to look at each one of these categories that we've developed and write a little blurb. So stigma, so this category is about same thing. This category, oops, DEGORI, blah, 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 blah. So when we come together as a group, first, we'll talk about what we found, what the categories were. Second, we will talk about what the category means. So we have like a solid definition that we all agree on. And then third, we'll find out which ones are more significant or are occurring most frequently. And we'll pick 3 of those across the question, all the interviews. And then we'll use those findings to dig into the one-on-one interviews with staff as part of our theoretical sampling to get a deeper understanding of what the category lack of resources really means. Was it about lack of school resources? Is it about lack of resources in society? Is it about family resources? Is it an access issue, or is it a comprehension issue? Maybe they're not in the right language. What is it about this particular category that we can potentially really define and elevate into a theme? Because the goal of this is to do a thematic analysis of these answers so that we're able to provide meaningful feedback to the school. So that when we tell them, we asked people, how could the school benefit the club in its mission? These 3 themes emerged. There wasn't enough direct staff time talking about the club. There wasn't enough physical space for the activities. We felt like advertising wasn't robust, something like that. So that they're actually getting very usable information. But the usable information is actually derived from all of these things that were said that we were able to kind of raise to higher levels of abstraction and define for them. Because we don't expect regular humans living out in the world to be able to conceptualize their reality. That's our job. So we're trying to conceptualize and package it for them into easily understood themes. So that's kind of the plan. So in theory, what Eric is doing, what Danny is doing, is something to this extent. For every single question, you will have a list of categories. You'll have the content color-coded for the category so we can see how frequently it's occurring. And you'll give some thoughts to what this category you created encompasses. What does it mean? And that's the gig. I hope that that was not too, I hope that wasn't too stressful and I didn't go too fast. There is a lot of really letting your mind kind of expand the thoughts that are in front of you. We don't create data, but we do allow kind of our philosopher self to come to the forefront and really say, like, what do they actually say? What potentially are they saying? What meaning, given what I know of them right now in this circumstance and from this background, what meaning did they imbue into these seemingly simple words? So that's the basic idea. I'm available for questions via text or email. I hope you guys survived that earthquake okay. I hope you had a good 4th of July. And I will be in touch. Bye.